Well, good afternoon, ladies. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare, Boothe, Luce Policy Institute, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our Conservative Women's Network this month. And I'm so happy to have Bridget Wagner here, our partner in this monthly adventure, and we have a great speaker for you here today. We have Catherine Engelbrecht to share her remarkable story. Catherine is a wife, a mother, a business owner, and a proud native Texan. After she founded True the Vote, an organization which seeks to prevent voter fraud, she also became the target of several hostile government agencies, including the IRS and the FBI. Catherine was called to full-time grassroots activism in 2008 when she said she could no longer watch silently as the government made decisions that stood in contrast to America's founding principles. With her family's support, she founded True the Vote, a citizen-led effort to restore honor and integrity to our electoral system. True the Vote is currently working with 30 states with an emphasis in select states and counties known to have problematic election processes. In 2011, the Conservative Political Action Conference presented Catherine and True the Vote with the Ronald Reagan Freedom Award in recognition of her groundbreaking work. In 2012, she was named one of Politico's 50 to watch, given to 50 new rising and talents on the national political scene. She lives with her husband of 20 years, just outside Houston. She has 2 redhead children, a boy 15 and a girl 13. And you know, despite attempts by the Obama administration to intimidate and silence her, Catherine continues to have a powerful impact. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Engelbrecht.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to keep my phone here because what I have learned is that I tend to talk a lot. And I know we have a lunch after this, so I will watch the time and make sure that we stay on track, I hope. Okay. So as Michelle said, I started an organization called True the Vote. Really, we started it in 2010. That's sort of when the clock started ticking on a number of things that I'll share with you. But I want to talk for a few minutes about why I got involved and what brought us to the point that we felt like it was necessary to actually create something that heretofore had never existed, citizen-led effort to really take back the reins of elections, why that was even necessary. As you heard Michelle say, in 2008, I watched what I thought was almost a surreal unfolding of regulatory invasion into our small business. My husband and I have a machine shop, and we make oil field component parts, and there's all kinds of regulations that were popping up out of nowhere. This is now 2008 into 2009. My parents both at the time were of poor health, and we were I'm always on doctor's appointments with them, and we were being told of narrowing options and fewer specialists available because they were preparing for what they saw coming. They were beginning to ratchet down their own operations. My children's school was beginning to receive curriculum from the federal government. And at some point, something goes off in you that says enough is enough. And I had never been involved in politics. It's wonderful to see all of you here, and I mean, I'm sure if we went and got everyone's stories, you're involved, obviously. I would have never known. Prior to 2009, I didn't know the Heritage Foundation existed. Shame on me. But thank gracious that you guys do. When the Tea Party burst onto the scene, I thought that seemed like a place that people were coming together who didn't really have it all figured out. And mercy knows I fit right into that crowd. Quickly after the rallies and such took off and people were beginning to find their voice and recognize that they really had input and that input needed to be shared, I realized that for me, I wanted to do more than just talk. I wanted to roll up my sleeves and actually make a difference. And so now we're talking 2009, and we had heard that there was a need for people to go work at the polls. can do that. That's simple enough. It'll be a one-day gig. We'll go work, we'll check that off the good citizen list, and we will move on to something else. Now, we're in Harris County, Texas. I live in Fort Bend County, Texas, so actually I had a different county experience, but nonetheless, just a small group of us working inside of the polls. And although after we came back together to compare notes, most of us had had wonderful experiences, those kinds of things that make you proud to be an American, proud of the process, proud of really the cornerstone of our republic, that free and fair vote. Some of us came back and said, "You're not going to believe what I saw." Everything ranging from certainly and chiefly insufficient numbers of volunteers to really affect anything if it does go south. So not enough volunteers, process confusion. Quick show of hands, how many of you have ever worked in the polls? Okay. If you have your hand raised and you're sitting next to someone that doesn't have their hand raised, just ball up your fist and punch them right in the shoulder. We all, if you've never done it, you have an opportunity still coming up. Try it. You will be amazed. You will never look at elections the same way again. I've voted my entire adult life, never having any understanding of the people that worked on the other side of the table. I vote at a little Baptist church, the prototypical sort of, white steeple. I didn't know if the little ladies there on the other side of that table worked for the church, worked for the county, worked for the guy. I didn't know. I just magic. It all happens, and I cast my vote, and in the cover of night somehow, they're all tabulated, and I should feel really, really good about that. It's a harrowing experience to get closer to the process and realize how much human intervention all along the way there really is. And if you were so inclined to tip the scales a little in your favor, one way or the other, there are certainly plenty of opportunities to do just that. So, in any case, fast forward, we saw things that troubled us at the polls. We saw process failure, insufficient numbers of volunteers, but we certainly saw election fraud, and I wish I could call it something other than that. We saw people who would come in with multiple registration cards in different names and present the one card, and then when the election judge would say, "Oh, no, that's been used. Oh, well, how about this one?" We would see people who would come in and sort of whisper, "I don't remember who I'm supposed to vote for." And then the election judge would say, "Oh, I can help you with that." And they would head off to the voting booth, and you would hear the election judge go so far as to, now, let's take a step back. If they didn't know how to use the machine, and in Texas, we vote with machines. How do you vote in Virginia? Machine? Okay. In Texas, it's called an e-slate machine, and it can be confusing. If you have questions about how to operate the equipment, you need help for that. That's fine. That's not what I'm talking about. We would hear the judge say on many occasions, "Put your hand on mine. We're going to turn 3 to the left and 4 to the right, and we're going to click enter." And the voter was completely happy about that. It was like that had been going on for an awfully long time. And when you see things like that, you have a choice. And many of you are younger in this room. I'll tell you, you're going to be you will face choices like this throughout your adult life, where you have an opportunity to either say, "Not right," and I'm not going to take it. I'm going to figure out how to get involved. I'm going to figure out how to make a difference. Or you can do what, sadly, far more people do, which is to say, "Man, I sure hope somebody does something about that." And I think we've all learned in many ways in these last few years that we've let it go far too long without citizens saying enough is enough. And it's going to be difficult to reel things back, to reinsert ourselves, but we have to. We have to go through these first awkward baby steps of reasserting ourselves. True the Vote is a nonpartisan organization. It was never meant to be about party. It is about principle. But what I have found is that the Democrat Party seems to be extremely well versed in engaging their constituents to action. The conservatives tend to be more about, and certainly my experience was to think that if you voted, you were effectively hiring the right person, and they would go do their job that they told you they would do on the campaign trail, and then you would be able to live your life and not have to worry about it that much. Again, I think we've all learned in these past few years that's not always the case. And so I would submit that if you didn't raise your hand and you're not working inside the polls, and if you're not doing some kind of civic engagement, that needs to become part of your portfolio, because we're at a point now where we've got to work and go to church and volunteer and raise our families and do all those things that we always have done, but we've all got to reserve a little bit of our lives to make sure that the process that keeps us free and fair, and that will keep your children free and fair, that stays, because it doesn't stay all on its own. In any case, we saw problems, we decided we would do something about it, and in so doing, we created True the Vote. I'm now going to rapid fire you through the next few years, because what happened in 2009 and what we saw took on several forms very quickly thereafter. We began looking at the voter rolls and trying to determine whether or not there are problems inside the rolls. We began to advocate for common sense election code reforms, just things that made sense based on the things that we saw inside the polls, based on the flaws that we saw inside the voter rolls. That became, for many reasons, national news, because there was no pro-liberty group out there just saying, rules matter. We are a country of rules, we are a country of laws, and they matter. That message began to permeate across the nation, and before we knew it, we had people calling us from all corners saying, that's what you guys saw in Texas, we're seeing stuff like that too, can we work together? And we thought, well, we're in the midst of this development of our own program, we really don't know what's going on, but sure, come on, we'll all work together. And before you know it, we have now this presence. We have volunteers in all 50 states. We do, as Michelle said, we do focus in more so on 30 states, but we help to support citizen-led efforts in a great many states, almost 300 citizen-led efforts altogether. If you have to really break down what it is that True the Vote does, just for your own, quick definition, we provide training for people who want to go and work inside the polls. And in all states, God bless the 10th Amendment, everybody runs their elections a little bit differently, and that can be a challenge. But we provide training that's state-specific. We help with research. We provide you with your voter rolls after you go through a short research training. We'll give you access online to your own county's voter rolls so that you can take a look at them and see if there are problems, and we bounce those lists up against other publicly available data sources, and then encourage you to take advantage of a too little used a federal provision in most states that allows you to file what are called citizen challenges. If you, as a registered voter in a county, see a problem with another registrant's file, and there are real substantive reasons to have concern, then those things can be turned over to the county, and essentially all you're doing is asking the question of the county, is there an issue? And then the county is left to their own devices. As I mentioned, we advocate based on all the things that we see earlier in the process. And then of late, we've begun to be involved in litigation, because sadly, we have learned that sometimes the only way you get action is to take it to court. I had never been involved in any kind of litigation before True the Vote. That is not the case any longer. We have taken on the state of Indiana. We are currently in the process of negotiations with the state of Ohio for their failure to clean up their voter rolls. You may recall when Allen West lost his election in Florida 18, the last election cycle, by fewer than 3,000 votes. He was ahead, then he was behind, then he was ahead, then he was behind, and in the end of the evening of election night, he was substantively ahead, and the next morning he was behind, and it was inexplicable how that happened. And then the election administrator came out and said, yeah, we maybe counted those ballots twice, or I'm not sure if we counted those military ballots or not. Yeah, whoops, sorry. We said, that can't have that. So we sued to do something that had never been done before, which was the first ever led citizen audit of a federal election to try to get inside of the documents. We're just trying to keep the process fair. And there's so much I can say on so many levels about why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. Let's talk about photo voter identification for a second. 83% of our country, studies show repeatedly, that hovering between high 70s and mid 80% agree that photo voter identification makes sense across all sort of people groups. Why then is it being used as a wedge issue among people to keep the pot stirred, to keep us angry, to keep us talking about things that divide us? I mean, an engaged electorate is a united America. Why are we seeing so many leaders try to do just the opposite, try to separate, try to divide, try to gin up anger? And I would submit it's because power is at stake. And when you think about vote fraud, yes, true, the vote is about protecting election integrity and preserving voters' rights. But people kind of get hung up sometimes on how often there are actually crimes of fraud that occur inside the polls. How many times are identities really stolen? How many times really and truly does an election judge vote for a voter? Well, a couple ways I can answer that. First is, how much fraud's okay? Is it okay if I steal just your vote or just your vote? You also don't need a whole lot of fraud. You just need a little fraud in the right places. And I think you can look at historically close races, none closer than the 2000 election that was separated by 300 some odd votes. That's 0.00000 to infinity 1% of the entire body of voters. Elections matter and every vote does count. But I will also say that it's not just about what happens at election day, because all the things that get you to that place, the litigation that happens behind the scenes to change the laws in ways that we are not fully aware of until it's too late. The fraud that is now baked into the process because we have been lax in making sure and standing guard over a system that makes sense. Those things now, they're going to have to be undone, and it's going to take time. But the only way we can even start the clock is by people getting involved. Our country has about half the necessary number of poll workers, so that's the first place and easiest place to start. A couple things that I wanted to share with you, because it is, Michelle did a great job of kind of talking about some of our more recent adventures that have become better known. When I filed our nonprofit application in July of 2010, prior to that I had never had any government agency interest in my life personally or in the nonprofit or professionally. That all changed after I filed that nonprofit application, and in January of 2011, it all sort of began. My husband and I were personally audited for 2 years running. Sometimes you draw the short straw, but in this case, that was a very, very, very short straw, because after we finished our personal audits, then our businesses were audited for 2 years running. Okay, I get it. Then OSHA showed up completely unannounced after not having any reason for them to be there, and demanded to talk to our employees when neither my husband or I were there, and went on to do a comprehensive audit. BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, showed up on 2 separate occasions to do comprehensive audits, to have us open our safes and show them our guns and write down the serial numbers. On the nonprofit side, we had the FBI come out on 5-6 occasions to ask questions about who was attending programs. The day after the election, a Texas environmental quality agency, it's not quite the EPA, but has some of the same characteristics, called the TCEQ, came out because an anonymous complaint had been called in. And all the while, we were turning over question after question after question after question to the IRS. Typical application takes between 6 and 9 months to resolve. We just received our C3 status 3 weeks ago now, after waiting for 3 years and a little more than 3 months. During that time, we have answered almost 300 questions. We have provided thousands of pages of documentation, and we've answered things like, we want to see every Facebook posting you've ever posted, every tweet you've ever tweeted. We want to know everywhere you've ever spoken since the inception of your organization and to whom and what you said. And that particular question was asked in February. They wanted to also know everywhere February of 2012, they also wanted to know everywhere I intended to speak through 2013. So, you're all on the list. No, I'm kidding. We didn't answer that. Bottom line is, there were questions that obviously did not have anything to do with whether or not we were in keeping within nonprofit standards or nonprofit regularly accepted behaviors. There was absolutely an interest in digging into how we were working and who we were working with. We have since sued the IRS over those very things, not only to get our 501c3 status determined, which we've done, but also to hold those individual employees, names we all now know and love, like Lois Lerner and William Wilkins and many others, hold them responsible for what they did. They broke the law. They, I think that they damaged my personal civil liberties, and they need to be held responsible for that. And we intend to hold them responsible the full distance. I know you have an election coming up here in Virginia. Before I close, I just want to say, please be involved in that. There are a lot of things that are happening right now related to that election, in the process of the election particularly, that you need to be aware of. The Democrat Party a few weeks ago sued to stop the state from cleaning its voter rolls. It's required by law to maintain your voter rolls. There are timelines and all those things that must be adhered to, and certainly you want to stay within those. But you do have to maintain your rolls. That's the whole purpose. Good data in, good data out. We actually sent a notification to Chesterfield County's election administrator last week, who is on record as saying that the matter of cleaning the voter rolls was simply too time-consuming, and refused to comply. No, I'm not going to do it. What are you going to do about it? We all have to ask ourselves what we're going to do about it. And we have to dig real, real deep, because the laws do matter, rules do matter. And if we do not hold our elections and our election administrators in this instance accountable, who will? Because it will not happen unto itself. You've got to stay engaged. So there are so many other stories I could entertain you with, but the long and the short of it is an effort like True the Vote has to exist, because citizens have to be ever vigilant about the protection of the vote, not just for their particular party, but for all of our country, because that's how democracy functions. That's what our republic is based on, and that's what I am now spending every waking moment doing, and it must matter to this administration an awful lot to try to do all they have to silence me. So on that note, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Bridget has the first question, and then we have a mic, if you give your name and affiliation when your mic comes.
So Catherine, you mentioned that someone can, the citizen-led efforts, someone can sign up with True the Vote and they can get their county voter file, and then they can go through the process of verifying. What are the kinds of things, what are the types of fraud that some of the citizen-led efforts have found? If someone here was to sign up and get this information, what are the things that they would be looking for?
Sure.
And what's the kind of most outrageous example?
Wow, that's a good question. Okay, so we have about 170 million voter files. So we've seen a lot. It started out when we were doing this locally, and trying to just kind of wrap your brain. What you find is you have to sort of, have you ever seen sometimes it's in the cartoons on the weekends in the paper, they have 3D images that are sort of just a series of colored dots, and you have to kind of let your eyes go out of focus before the 3D image comes out. welcome to True the Vote. That's kind of what you have to do. You have to look at it, it won't make any sense at all, and then you begin to kind of really think about how the pieces might fit, and all of a sudden you begin to see patterns. So yes, to your question, if you sign up at True the Vote, truethevote.org, and indicate that you're interested in research, there's an online training that you go through, and we teach you how to use the tools that we've created. What have we seen? Well, the most common things, and you really can't out and out prove fraud. You can prove intent. You can certainly, point out problems. People who are registered in more than one state, and then of course that crosses a line when you're actively voting in more than one state in the same election cycle, which we've done research on. People who are deceased and still on the rolls. People who are entered more than once, and you wonder, well, how could that be possible? It's interesting, Google knows every time my heart beats, but yet we can't have inside of our, typically inside of your state level election software or administration software, the sense, that the fuzzy logic sense that realizes that when you transpose a letter, or sometimes when you use a middle name and sometimes you don't, that could still be the same person. So you end up with multiple registrations because they're just registering everybody. We certainly see the situations where you have extraordinary numbers of people registered at the same address. That can become a challenge because you want to make sure that you are mindful of those facilities that cater to people who are indigent and who certainly can be registered and can have their voter registration card delivered to those addresses. But again, you begin to see patterns that make you question. I know one of the first things I found like this when I was doing research in Texas was someone registered, a group of people actually registered at a Jack in the Box. It's legal in Texas. Domicile's kind of a state of mind. So even though you're supposed to live where you are registered, what it tells you is you can point that out to the county. The county's going to tell you it's legal. What's your next step? It's advocacy. Try to bring some sanity to the process. So there's all kinds of ways. And we probably, as we speak, we probably have about 1,300 researchers online right now in their various states looking. And it's like sifting through a haystack, but it's got to be done.
Vacant lots.
Oh, yeah, vacant lots, people registered on golf courses, crazy names being registered. I think, if I recall correctly, Jesus is registered in California and God's registered in Texas or something. I mean, the crazy names, they all make it into the registry. We're like, election administrators are like Cirque du Soleil acrobats in bending over to make sure that everyone gets registered, which is great, except at some point you have to ask some critical questions, and those questions aren't asked for fear of retribution.
Okay, questions? Wait for the mic so everybody can hear. Yeah, down here.
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I'm affiliated with myself. I don't know what to say. Okay, so I am one of those people that have never worked in the poll, okay? If I did in Virginia this time, and I see voter fraud going on or something very suspicious, to whom do I go to at that time?
That is a great question. We felt the same way when we started and saw the things that I described to you, and you're slack-jawed, like, what do you do? And it happens like that. People often comment that, show us where the vote fraud exists. And even though there have been prosecutions or convictions of vote fraud related crimes in 36 states in the last 18 months alone. It happens, you just don't hear about it. But why is it difficult to really get a handle on what's really going on inside the polls? Is because it happens like this. Our system is based on privacy and frankly built on the idea that there's honor among men and that people aren't going to cheat. When you see something, what we train for is to write it down on what we call incident reports and then report those things as they are happening. You need to chronicle it, certainly, but report them as a poll watcher, if that's what capacity in which you're serving. You can only talk to the judges there at the table. You cannot speak to the voters. You can't get engaged with what's actually happening. You can watch it and report it. If the judge doesn't take action, then you have, depending upon what you've seen, there are ways to escalate right there inside of the polls, to call out to, any number of avenues depending on what your state's set up. But after the fact, certainly to turn those incident reports into your, here in Virginia, to your State Board of Elections. From there, they should be investigating that and rolling up to their attorneys general what it is that they've seen and follow up on it. But none of that happens if there are not, eyes and ears of the Republican side of the polls.
I'm Catherine Rodriguez. I'm with the Clare, Boothe, Luce Institute, and I'm also not as familiar with what goes on at polls. And I just wondered if you could shed some light on how these poll judges are selected. Are they appointed to that? Is there some kind of connection that they have to get that job, or are they just volunteers? How does that work?
That's a great question. So, quick answer is that on election day, and I've learned this the hard way, every state runs things a little bit differently, so I'll kind of give you a broad answer that generally applies. On election day, the people that sit behind the table, not the poll watchers are purely volunteer, but the people that are sitting behind the table, your judges, your clerks, your translators, they work for the county. They're being paid to work for the county on that day. Typically, the way that they are selected is by virtue of who they vote for in the primary, or if you're in a state where you declare party, the parties each want to make sure they have, parity. Too often, there is not parity among parties inside of the polls. There's oftentimes just one party being represented. And when there's only one party being represented, then it becomes a rat race to just plug those holes. I mean, who can you get with the polls to work inside the polls? And that's just not how it should be. We should be, we should have a deep, deep bench of volunteers. Does that answer? Yeah.
Let me ask you about the IRS. Cleta's your lawyer, right?
Oh, yes.
Cleta Mitchell, she's been here, she's spoken here. In fact, she just got our Clare, Boothe, Luce Woman of the Year Award for 2013. When we applied to the IRS, it was 20 years ago, Clare, Boothe, Luce, for our exemption. We hadn't really done anything yet, so we didn't have the problem of what have you done. But there was a feminist agent who was reviewing our application, and she told our lawyer, she was a feminist, and she challenged some of the basic conservative women premises of the Clare, Boothe, Luce Policy Institute. And I remember our lawyer at the time saying, first place, you have no right to ask this because your right is to look at dupe, dupe, and dupe. But then he gave the answers anyway, and she accepted that. Did Cleta do that for you too? Does she say when they ask something they have no right to ask about, you have no right to ask this because your authority is to do, and then give the answer?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, what we have made it a very intentional point to do is to leave nothing unaddressed.
Yes.
And so even if we're not going to come out and answer, for example, the question of, everywhere you ever spoke and to whom and what you said, and there's all kinds of case law that exists to give us a reason that we shouldn't have to. I mean, if common sense doesn't prevail, here's the law on why you should. Here's precedent on why that shouldn't be a germane question. So we've made very, very sure to answer and address everything, but it certainly doesn't stop them from asking.
No. Up here.
Anjali Schrader with the Heritage Foundation, and thank you for speaking on such an important issue. It seems like there's not a lot of people who work on this issue, but I know that we have here at Heritage one expert, Hans von Spakowski, who works a lot on this. How do you partner with some of the work he's doing as well?
Hans is fantastic. He is absolutely of the top tier of people in this country that understand the way the process works and understands the weaknesses and understands and can identify ways to address those weaknesses. Hans has one of the more recent things he opened my eyes to was the push at the federal level for universal voter registration, which is an effort to get everybody enrolled or everybody registered if you exist on a voter roll anywhere. And when you pair that with the weaknesses that are already in the process, it does not bode well for security. Election law is a wonky, weird, difficult, tedious, granular thing to understand. And so thank gracious for people like Hans who have made it their life's work to really get inside it and understand it. And he's invaluable to an effort like ours.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Fight. Thank you so much for speaking on
Absolutely.
this important topic. Two things. I had heard that there's new software that they put into the computer machines, to the election machines, so that they can then guarantee an outcome of 49-51, which of course is the way that Obama won this last time around. But in state after state, that was his percentage. And so I've heard that there are ways that you can rig the machines to guarantee that. And I'm wondering what you know about that. And then number two, looking at the 18th in Florida, that congressional district, it makes me wonder about like the 11th in Virginia, which is Jerry Connolly's district, which was highly competitive. And we definitely saw far more voters coming in to vote absentee in the 11th. And so I was very suspicious when I saw that, because I work in the office, that what happens if people that are registered to vote in the 11th and then they're registered in the 18th in Florida and a hot one in a battleground state like Ohio, whatever the hot district was there, is there somebody that can then start comparing those voter rolls to find out, oh, how many of those, the guys down in Florida in Allen West District actually popped up in Fairfax County also voting in that same election.
Right.
And so I was just wondering if there was any effort to do that across state lines, to look at the hot districts in the battleground states, which we know were the target states, to say, I believe that there's some puppet masters pulling strings,
Right.
Across the country. So just, what have you found
Well,
about
I'll
that?
take your last question first. So who's looking across the state lines? I always hope that there are people that in organizations that I'm not aware of that are doing that. But to the best of my knowledge, we're the only ones doing those kinds of cross-state comparisons. And it is a challenge because you're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of data passes to try and look and see who's voted and how and where and when. All of those things have to line up perfectly in order for us to even submit them. So when I mentioned earlier about the fuzzy logic of a close name or sometimes a middle initial being used or not used and may generate an additional registration, because when you bring these things public, you endure such a tremendous scrutiny, we've learned that we only submit perfect matches because those are irrefutable. To your point, if I were going to try and steal an election, because of the way that our laws are written, are there those people, and have we found people, and we found thousands, who have voted in more than one state in the same election cycle? Absolutely, that happens. But there's no reason in the world why you wouldn't just make up entirely false identities, or just look and see who doesn't vote and then vote their registration. America has the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized nation in the world. The odds are, if you decided to just help yourself to someone's registration, odds are they would never know. Even if it was found out, you have to be able to prove intent. And so identifying fraud becomes, again, another degree more difficult, because if you can't prove intent, it all just sort of vanishes into thin air and everybody, says their apologies and goes on their way.
What do you mean? I didn't know I voted in 2 different states?
Mm-hmm.
Does that fly?
Yeah, absolutely, it flies.
I didn't know
I
that
didn't
was
know.
wrong.
I didn't know. Well, whoops. Absolutely. So that's that answer. The question about the computers is one we hear very often. And it's tricky because we all know that, can any of us name a computer system that we've seen a lot of glitches in lately? It exists and it happens. And I could make the case that if you are playing for stakes of essentially control of the free world, it might be in your interest to explore that. That said, the systems themselves, the computer systems, run independently. They're not daisy-chained together, so you would have to go in and rig in individual machines. That adds a layer of complexity. The process of setting up a machine, when you open the polls, you run what's called, for those states that have electronic voting, you run what's called a zero tab to make sure that there are no votes currently in that machine. You run it per machine. Then throughout the day you do audits to make sure that the number of people that have checked in matches the number of people that have voted. At the end of the day you run a tally. All of those numbers should check out, and they should track all the way through to your central voting location. Here's the catch. If citizens aren't involved, none of that happens. So it's impossible to really say with any degree of certainty what may or may not be happening if you don't have people watching inside of the polls. And it's amazing what seems like it may have been going on in the past that just doesn't happen when people are observing. Observation changes things. So sometimes it's difficult to prove a negative. You can't, well, you know, what was the impact of True the Vote? Nothing happened. Well, great, so how effective were you? It's difficult. If there's a way to cheat, people will cheat. That's the bottom line. We can look, I mean, our government, anywhere you turn, is full of corruption. We don't somehow spring up halos when we walk inside the polls.
Question? Wait for the mic here.
Mary Ann Eastman from Virginia. Not a question, just an observation back to one of your other points. Virginia is top heavy with Democrats, poll watchers and workers, desperately in need of Republicans. I mean, this is a really important election coming up, and we really need people to get out and
Who should people contact
and
if
be
they
there.
suddenly decide they're going to be a poll watcher?
Um,
I'd like to.
Well, Cindy, Donna Curtin is the name that comes to mind in Virginia, in Fairfax County.
And essentially what you're committing to, you will be trained, for those of you that are like deer in the headlights, oh my Lord, I don't know how to run the polls. You would be provided training, and it would be a one-day commitment. Yeah, but well worth it.
Right here in the front. Wait for the mic, sorry.
Oh, I'm a recent transplant from Maryland, and I haven't been fully up to speed on Virginia, but I think there are some similarities. Pick a candidate you would like to poll watch for, and that candidate can sponsor you. You could also be sponsored by a political party. In terms of training to be a judge, that training deadline may have passed because we're getting so close to the election. But I will say, just from experience, being a poll watcher, you can thwart fraud potentially by being there. The election judges know that you're there, and I won't go into stories that I've seen, but you can help prevent fraud. And I believe the affiliate of True the Vote, I mean, they're not affiliated legally, but the group that was started in Virginia, I think, is the Virginia Voters Alliance with Reagan George. But I will make sure that's true, and I can get the information to Cindy Rushing, and she can get it out to you. And they may be signing up poll watchers as well.
Anybody who wants to, just get in touch with Cindy. crushing@cblpi.org. It's the same as the invitation you get to this, except the C Rushing.
One more thing that they really need help with is absentee. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. It's on.
Shout.
The other thing that this Miss Curtin has let us all know is that they really need help with counting absentee votes. That they have very few people on the right that are counting those votes. And she said there's a...
Typically counting and the signature verification,
Yes.
matching signatures from the
Yes.
request to the actual ballot.
So that's another way. And that, if you work during the day, that's something you can do in the evenings.
And how would they get involved in that? Who would they call? Were you going to find out?
Yeah, I believe that if you want an email address, it's dcurtin, C-U-R-T-I-N.
D-C-U-R-T-I-N.
Is it at Hotmail? I believe she's at Hotmail.
Is there normally an
she's
Yes, I mean, and again, every state runs their things a little bit
Yeah,
differently.
right.
Don Palmer is the secretary of the elections board here in Virginia. He would certainly, in his office would certainly be able to direct you. To Kathy's point, you generally are volunteering on behalf of a candidate or a party. You could certainly call straight away to the party of your choice, and they could help you out. Were there a little more time through the vote, would be able to step up and say, we can help you, and certainly would be glad to help you, but the fact is the clock's ticking, and you need to get in place now.
Hi, I'm Katie Doran. I'm an intern here at the Heritage Foundation, and I was just wondering if you found bipartisan support with the True the Vote, or
Great
if it's
question.
leaned either side.
Great question. I would love to stand before you and tell you, yes, we have had bipartisan support. We have all come together. We join hands. We sing Kumbaya. We make s'mores. It's great. That's not what happens. There is one party, and it is the Republican Party, that has come to us and said, boy, oh boy, do we need volunteers. If you will train them, just tell them they need to find us. We will absolutely put them to work. Thank you so much for what you're doing. There is another party, the Democrat Party, that has sued us on regular occasion, that smears us every time they have an opportunity. And so when people ask if we work with both parties, I say, yes, we work with both parties, just slightly differently.
I would really like to volunteer for True the Vote. And what is the very first step to take?
Very first step, thank you for asking that. Very first step is go to truethevote.org, and you will see a button that says Get Involved. Click that button, and it'll take you through a series of not only your contact information, but your preferences, what you're interested in. And then behind the scenes, through the magic of databases, not only are you connected with us centrally, but your information is or a new record is sent to, in the case of Virginia, to the Virginia Voters Alliance, letting them know that somebody in their area has expressed interest, and then those leaders then will reach out to you for your state-specific, your county-specific opportunities.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you.